guys, and welcome back to episode 5 of the podcast. My name is Robbie Cassidy, and today we're going to discuss breathing. So the goal of today's podcast is to help you understand the effect that breathing can have on your body and your states of mind. I'm going to talk through a couple of different things. Most importantly, I'm going to talk through nasal breathing, different breathing patterns that you can have, stress management, and then the idea of Bohr's law as well. So the first thing that we can touch on is going to be respiration rate. And respiration rate is just the amount of breaths that you take per minute. So the average amount of breaths that a normal person is going to take is going to be between 12 and 22 breaths per minute. So that would be a normal breathing rate. And the reason I want to start with that is because you'll find that people that are sick will be breathing higher. They could breathe up to maybe 30 breaths per minute, up to 35. And that's why you'll see that a nurse, when they come in to assess somebody in hospital or in a hospital bed, they'll always check their respiratory rate because it does tell a lot about the body. Now, what actually affects your breathing rate? Well, there's a few different things that tie into it, and there's different conditions. You can have like COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. There's other things like you can have asthma and you can have lung cancers. Or else you can your stress levels can also affect your breathing rate. And you'll find that I talk about stress a lot in this podcast, and I don't mean stress specifically on psychological stress, I mean physiological stress as well. So if you're out of breath after running, your breathing rate is going to be increased to try catch up. But we'll talk about why that's actually not as effective as you would think it is as we go through the podcast. So we'll start out with Bohr's law. And Bohr's law then is going to be the effect that oxygen and carbon dioxide has on hemoglobin. The easiest way to describe it is you have hemoglobin in your blood, and that carries oxygen when it comes in to the different tissues. The hemoglobin is going to pick up oxygen in the lungs as you breathe in, and then it's going to travel around to different areas of your body. Now, for it to actually release the oxygen to the muscles and to your brain, there has to be a certain level of carbon dioxide in your blood. In relation to Bohr's law, we'll start from the very beginning. So think about a normal breath. You inhale, you take oxygen in, and then you exhale and you blow carbon dioxide out. Now, once the oxygen comes in, it goes into your lungs, and then it is transferred over to the blood through capillaries, which are small blood vessels, and then the hemoglobin in your blood is going to carry that oxygen around the body to your brain and to your muscles. Now, the interesting part with this, and previously would have been taught, or a lot of people would have taught, and I'm sure some of you would think yourself, that carbon dioxide is a waste product in the body and that it's not actually needed for anything, and it's a product of cell metabolism, that you wouldn't need it and all you're trying to do is get rid of it. But carbon dioxide actually plays an important role in the transfer of this oxygen from your blood to your brain or to your muscles. So as the hemoglobin is carrying your oxygen around your body, it gets to your brain. For it to actually offload that oxygen, there needs to be a certain level of CO2 in your blood. In an average person or on a daily basis, you're going to have around about 98% oxygen saturation in your blood. So what that means is that your oxygen carrying capacity in your blood is nearly full all of the time. Now, if different conditions are going to affect that, but it might come down to, let's say, 96 to or even down to 88% in conditions such as COPD. What Bohr's law finds then is that you will need a certain amount of carbon dioxide in your blood, and you need your blood's pH to drop below a certain level before that oxygen is actually released into your muscles and into your brain. So this is the part that actually confuses people, but if you get your head around this, it does help you understand what I'm going to talk about as we go through this podcast. So take that again, in that when you inhale in, your oxygen is transferred over to your blood, and then your hemoglobin, which is a molecule in your blood, is carrying it around to your muscles and to your brain. Now, when your carbon dioxide reaches a high enough level in your blood, or your pH drops low enough, then that oxygen is released into your muscles, okay, and into your body. So what we have to think about is, how can we increase your CO2, which is your carbon dioxide? How can we increase your carbon dioxide levels in your blood? Now, the simplest way to increase your carbon dioxide in your blood is to slow your breathing down, or you could hold your breath. That's probably the easiest way to increase it. And what that does then when you hold your breath is that carbon dioxide builds up, pH of the blood comes down, oxygen is released, and then the hemoglobin is come back to your lungs to try pick up more again. Now, there's a respiratory center in the brain that's actually controlling this. It's a controlled center, and what it's doing is basically letting the body know once CO2 has got high enough, it'll increase your breathing rate, so you will start blowing it off a bit more, and you'll blow off CO2 to avoid acidosis is the easiest way to explain it. So where your pH level drops too low and your body gets too acidic. Now, if your tolerance to CO2 is very poor, this respiratory control center will increase your respiratory rate or increase your breathing rate at lower levels of CO2. I want you to think about that for a second. If your breathing rate increases and you start blowing off CO2, so that's like breathing fast, like you'll find that you're blowing off all that CO2, and then if you don't have enough CO2 in your body, that comes back to the idea of your oxygen saturation in your blood. Your oxygen won't actually get released. You'll have it, you'll still take it in, but it won't be released to your brain and to your muscles. So if you're breathing really fast, you're blowing off all your CO2, and then because you have no CO2 in your body, your hemoglobin is going to hold on to that oxygen and it's going to carry it around your body, and it's not going to release it to the brain or release it to your muscles. So even though, let's say for example, after a run, you're breathing really fast, you're not actually taking in or not using that oxygen, you're just taking it in. And this is where the idea of slowing your breath down is really important, and actually letting that CO2 build up so that the oxygen can be released. Now, I hope that isn't too sciencey for people who wouldn't have heard of this before, heard of this concept before, but if you can get your head around it, it does make a lot of sense, especially in relation to what we're going to talk about. So going back to the respiratory control center, if your CO2 tolerance is low, your body is going to tell, or your brain is going to tell your body to start increasing its breath. So it's going to speed up your breath. You're going to take short, shallow breaths to try offload that CO2 and try take in more oxygen. So it's counterintuitive in that you're actually increasing your breathing rate, but you're not taking in as much oxygen. You're not using the oxygen that you're taking in. So if you've got a good understanding of that, the rest of this podcast, I want you to think about it, see if you can improve it, like if you can understand the concepts that I'm talking about and see if you can apply them to your own life. So the first thing you can do is slow your breathing down. Second thing you can do then, after that, is start working on nasal breathing. So nasal breathing is breathing in and out through your nose completely. And the idea of this is that, well, they say noses were for breathing, mouths are for eating. But there's actually so many more benefits to nasal breathing that you may or may not have heard about. And it's really important to take them into account, and it can improve everything from your sleep to your athletic performance to your concentration and even memory formation. So a few of the normal benefits of nasal breathing would be it does warm and filter the air and humidifies it. So it actually acts as the first line of defense if you're inhaling through your nose and exhaling through your nose. And that's because the mucus and the cilia around your nose act as that filter. There is actually antiviral properties in your nose, and that comes because there's also, on top of what I just spoke about there is a microbiome like what there is in your gut. And they're correlated in that if you eat fermented foods, that will improve your gut microbiome, but it'll actually improve your nasal cavity microbiome also. And as it's your first line of defense, that's where all your air is coming in, and all the viruses and bacteria that could be in the air that you're breathing, and even in relation to COVID or just normal colds, that nose gives you the best chance to get a start on your immune response, or it'll trigger your immune response so that your body is better able to cope with the viruses that are coming in. So if you take in a very serious virus that your body wouldn't have known before or has come across before, even better, your nose recognizes that, or or the microbiome in your nose recognizes that virus, and then it triggers that immune response, so it's faster acting. Now, I'll come back to that in a second, but what I'm going to touch on quickly, because if we're talking about nasal breathing, we may as well cover the effects of what mouth breathing has on you. Now, mouth breathing is actually a lot worse for you than you would think, and in a couple of ways, it even changes how you look. If you're breathing through your mouth all the time, your sinuses are not going to work as well, in that they're going to get congested, and your sinuses are in your nasal cavity and they're involved in the production of nitric oxide, and we'll talk a small bit about that. And that's not nitrous oxide, what you put in cars or what people use as gas, but it's actually nitric oxide. It's a different type, so don't get that confused. We'll talk about that in a second though. So mouth breathing actually, as I said, it congests your sinuses. It actually narrows your face as well, and it can cause your teeth to become crooked. The easiest way to think about this is if we explain nasal breathing. If you're breathing through your nose, your mouth is closed and your tongue sits at the roof of your mouth. And if it sits at the roof of your mouth, that causes your teeth and your jaw and your cheekbones to widen out. Now, if your tongue is sitting at the bottom of your mouth, which it has to be if you're breathing through your mouth, the face forms differently. It becomes longer and narrower, because it doesn't have to form around your tongue. So if your jaw is narrow and your cheekbones are down, then your teeth will come in crooked because they don't have enough space to grow in, so they'll have to grow in along beside each other. On top of that, then it actually increases your heart rate and your blood pressure, and unfortunately for men, it increases your chance of erectile dysfunction. And I'll go into detail on why this happens, but the easiest way to explain it is to talk about nasal breathing. So as I said earlier, nasal breathing warms, filters and humidifies the air, and it acts as your first line of defense. And then on top of that, it adds a resistance when you're breathing to your breath or to the inhalation, which slows your breath down and improves your oxygen transfer. Because as we said, if you slow your breath down, it can increase your CO2 in your blood, and then that can cause the oxygen to transfer over better. So the nose actually adds that resistance to help accommodate or facilitate that. The nose itself on the outside of your face is actually only 30% of the nasal cavity, so 70% of that is behind it. So nitric oxide then is a gas produced in the nasal cavity. And what it does is it dilates your lungs and it dilates the blood vessels. Basically, it just makes them larger. Is the easiest way to think about it. And if it does that, it can then reduce your blood pressure because it's not as much pressure to pump blood around the body, and then it can also reduce your heart rate. On top of all that, then the antiviral properties that are associated with nasal breathing are also associated with the nitric oxide. And they found that people that exhale more nitric oxide have reduced symptoms of colds and flus. Moreover, then it actually improves neurotransmission. So it's involved in a lot of very important functions in the body, and the majority of it is actually produced in your nose. So if you are mouth breathing all the time, you're not getting that nitric oxide, and then you're having all these carryover effects on top of that. And as I said earlier about erectile dysfunction, it's actually the nitric oxide produced in your nasal cavity that reduces the chance of this. And Pfizer found this out, and when they found this out, I should say, the pill Viagra works on this mechanism. So a natural stimulant then would be nitric oxide. And you can get nitric oxide, they're finding in athletic performance, it can improve sprint times and it can improve power output. And you can get it from foods such as beetroot is the main one, which I absolutely hate, so I won't be eating that anytime soon, and I'm just going to stick to the nose breathing. But it is actually extremely important in so many functions in the body, and the fact that it's taken from your nose, if you are mouth breathing, you're skipping all those benefits that you can have just from nasal breathing. On top of that, then they found that humming actually increases the nitric oxide production in your nose 15 times. So when it comes to forms of meditation that involve humming, that's the system that they're working on. Whether they are aware of that or not, it can help calm you because of the fact that you're taking in so much more, so reducing your blood pressure, and reducing your heart rate and dilating your lungs. So you obviously can't be humming all the time, but it does work, and it does actually improve that nitric oxide production and vasodilation in the body and neurotransmission. So on top of that, any athletes that are listening to this at the moment, or if you're involved in endurance events, you should definitely be breathing through your nose. And that even goes to the point that you should be breathing when you're running. And it's something that long distance runners use. And I think it was the US track and field athletes, the coach used to have them, and this is back in the 90s, used to have them hold water in their mouth while they ran to stop them breathing through their mouth while they were running. And it was really effective as well. Like, it is very effective in that it does improve your endurance. It's tough at the start. It's very hard to get used to. And there is times that you may need to breathe through your mouth, but that's only when you're completely gassed. Like, you will take example any animal. The only time you'll see an animal breathing through their mouth, and with the exception of a dog, which uses it to cool themselves, the only time you'll actually see them breathing through their mouth is when they are sick. So in relation to athletic performance then, a takeaway that you can use from this is that you should be breathing through your nose. Now, if you're lifting heavy weights and if you're doing that, it does change a small bit. You should aim to breathe through your nose. But if you're doing runs, you should nearly be always breathing through your nose. And if you're trying to recover after a run, you're always breathing through your nose. And the idea behind that is that it helps you recover faster. It adds that resistance. If you're breathing really fast, you're going to blow off all your CO2. And even though you're taking in that oxygen, first, your lungs aren't dilated, your blood vessels aren't dilated because you're not taking in the nitric oxide through your nose. Second, you've blown off all your CO2, so your oxygen isn't getting transferred from your blood to your muscles and your brain, and you're not recovering properly. Now, there's a form of training that you can do that when you are running, or when you are, let's say use running because it's the easiest example, that you will only run at the pace that you're able to maintain nasal breathing, because you're not going to be able to, at the start, and especially as you go through it, you're not going to be able to use or maintain nasal breathing if you're gassed all the time, because it gets too tough and it makes you lightheaded at the start. So you should only run to the effort that you are able to maintain, that are able to keep breathing through your nose. So it'll take a small while to adapt, and it'll take a small while for your respiratory center to increase its tolerance to CO2. But once it does, you'll recover more effectively, and you will also be able to go for longer. So this is something I use with all my clients as we get through it, and it ties into stress management so well as well. Coming back to that boards again, if you think about it in terms of stress, if you're breathing fast and you're blowing off all your CO2 and you have a low CO2 tolerance, then your body will feel that it's under threat on a day-to-day because you're blowing off all that CO2, because the respiratory center's tolerance is so poor and you're breathing fast. That sends it to your nervous system that you're under threat, and then it's a vicious cycle in that one plays into the other and one plays into the other all the time. So even if you do try to slow your breath down, you'll feel anxious and you'll feel uncomfortable because that tolerance is so poor. So we can build that up, and we can actually increase the tolerance. That tolerance is programmed. It's the easiest way to say it in your respiratory center, but it can be reprogrammed. And the easiest way to reprogram it is through breath holds and through exposing it to high levels of CO2. So slowing your breath down again, and low amplitude, easy breathing is the best way to increase that tolerance. In the book, The Oxygen Advantage, for Patrick McKeown, who's actually a Galway native, not too far from myself, he talks about this, and he talks about breathing light to breathe right. And he has an excellent analogy in it that there's a couple of ways of breathing, in that you're breathing so everyone can hear you if you're breathing into your nose. Then you're breathing so the person sitting beside you can't hear you. That's an improvement. And this is all through your nose. And then breathing so you can't actually hear yourself breathing, and then breathing so you don't realize that you're breathing. They're the different steps and different levels that you're trying to achieve. So that's one to practice, and you can practice that in 1-2 minute bouts, in that breathing so slowly and so quietly that you can't actually hear yourself breathing first, because it'll be easier to start with that one as opposed to feel yourself breathing. And then do that for your 1 to 2 minutes, take a couple of minutes off, and come back to it again. And what you're doing is you're trying to reset that respiratory control center so that your tolerance to CO2 improves. Because if you are breathing like that, and if you are a habitual mouth breather, you're going to find it difficult to even get a minute of that. And something that I should have touched on earlier, and it works in well into actually stress management, and breathing patterns improve your ability to cope with stress, is if you think about somebody who's having an anxiety attack or a panic attack, what they do is they give them a bag to breathe into. Because they're hyperventilating, they're blowing off all their CO2, they're breathing really fast, they're blowing off all their CO2, and then they can't pick up the oxygen, and then they're getting lightheaded because the oxygen isn't being released to their body. So when you give them a bag, that bag, they put it over their mouth, and then they're taking back in the carbon dioxide, which is helping them use that oxygen, which is actually calming them down. So in terms of athletic performance, you're trying to increase your tolerance to CO2 so that you don't breathe as fast and that you can recover better. In terms of stress management, then, you're trying to increase your CO2 tolerance. Same again, so you're not breathing as fast and your respiratory rate isn't really high and you're not under pressure all the time. So if you can slow that down, slow your breath down, there is research showing that if you can breathe under 8 breaths per minute, that it puts you into a parasympathetic state. So your sympathetic state is your fight or flight. I know it doesn't sound like it, but because it's sympathetic, but your sympathetic is your fight or flight. Your parasympathetic is your rest and digest, and that's your relaxing state. Now, going from that onto different breathing patterns that you can use and why you would use them. So there is rhythmic breathing, and then there's slow breathing, high amplitude breathing, then there's sighs or physiological sighs, then there's non-rhythmic breathing as well on top of that. Now, if you want to go into a small bit of detail on it, rhythmic breathing is controlled by a center in your brain that's Prebot-Zinger complex, named after a bottle of wine, and that's when an inhale follows an exhale follows an inhale follows an exhale. But you can include holds in that as well, as long as it's rhythmic. Now, the reason I talked about that, or I said I'd throw in the idea of the Prebot-Zinger complex, which is an area in your brainstem, is because that is actually connected to another area in your brain called the locus ceruleus. Hope I'm saying that right. Which is associated with alertness. So in relation to increasing your alertness and increasing your focus, what you're trying to do, or one thing that you're aiming to do, is get more norepinephrine in the brain, because that increases your alertness. To have that released, because as I was saying, that Prebot-Zinger complex is connected to the locus ceruleus. Now, you don't have to remember these names. You just have to remember rhythmic breathing is connected to an area in your brain that's associated with alertness. And then the easiest way to do this is deep inhales and deep exhales. Okay, so high amplitude breathing is going to increase your alertness. So even similar to Wim Hof style breathing, where you're high amplitude breathing, you'll find that you are a lot more alert after doing it. I'm a lot more alert after doing that. But yeah, so that's just something simple that improves your alertness. Now, the opposite then, that non-rhythmic breathing, if you want to, a physiological sigh is a good example of that, and that's taking a double inhale and then an extended exhale. So that's okay. And what you're doing is, when you're taking a double inhale, you're getting this collateral ventilation, which basically slams open the alveoli and draws out the maximum amount of CO2 from your blood. Okay, so it actually averages out the oxygen CO2, that they're the same, but it does take out that maximum amount of CO2, and that works on an area in the brain, or the brainstem, that's the parafacial nucleus, and that's connected to putting you into a relaxed state, or putting you into a parasympathetic state. So double inhale, extended exhale. If you feel like an anxiety attack is coming on, or feel like a panic attack is coming on, it's one that you can use, one that can be in your arsenal all the time. Just take that double inhale, extended exhale. Now, really, you should probably do it through your nose completely. So double inhale through your nose and long exhale through your nose. And as you'll hear from me doing that, is you'll hear a big, like a whistle, because I've broke my nose a few times when I was boxing, and now I have a whistle in it when I'm doing it. So it's something I'm trying to get rid of, is through nasal breathing and I've focused on it a lot more over the last couple of months to see if I can widen that cavity just from breathing through your nose. So if high amplitude breathing, which is deep inhales and deep exhales, increases your alertness, then low amplitude, very slow breathing, minimal breathing is actually going to reduce your alertness and put you into a more relaxed state. That's also, as I mentioned earlier, or just mentioned right before this, in that double inhale, double exhale is a way to put you into a relaxed state. If you want to keep that state, you have to have low amplitude breathing. So that's that slow breathing, just normal inhales, normal exhales, but nothing, you're not taking deep breaths. And the idea of taking a deep breath, as counterintuitive as it is not as effective as it is. It does slow your breathing down, which does improve that oxygen transfer. But a lot of the time when you take a deep breath, you inhale through your mouth first, is what a lot of people do, and you only inhale to the upper part of your lungs because your chest raises up. But what you want to really think about is diaphragmatic breathing in through your nose, to take in more nitric oxide, to dilate your lungs, to fill your lungs completely, and to give your body enough of a chance to build up CO2 to let go of that oxygen and let it into the blood, or let it into the muscles. So we've touched on there just a couple of simple things that you can use to bring down your stress levels immediately, and that's that physiological sigh, which is that double inhale, extended exhale. Then we've also talked about increasing your alertness through breathing, because it has such an effect on states of mind. And to increase your alertness, it was high amplitude breathing, deep inhales, deep exhales, consistent, keeping them rhythmic. And then to put you in a relaxed state over like a longer term, or what you should be focusing on is breathing light to breathe right. And that's inhaling and exhaling and using that hold at either end, but doing it so the person beside you can't hear you. When you get good at that, doing it so you can't hear yourself. And then when you even get better at that, doing it so that you can't feel it yourself. I don't know if I'll ever get away with that idea of the person beside me not hearing me breathing, especially if I'm going to be nasal breathing, because considering I'm like a train when I'm breathing through my nose, might not be as effective. But for now, we'll see how it goes, because there is research to support that if you do breathe through your nose, it does widen the cavity. So I am banking on that at the moment. Now, in relation to stress management and breathing, and I'm going to finish up on this, and I'll give a couple of takeaways after it, but in relation to stress management, what some people have been doing or experimenting with, or one thing they're doing is raising your stress threshold. And that's what I was talking about with that CO2. But what they're talking about, or the way they're doing it, is they're using that Wim Hof breathing, or using that high amplitude breathing consistently over a long time, and then trying to relax themselves when they're in that stressful state. Because as I said, if you're breathing really fast, it increases your alertness. It's going to release that norepinephrine. You're going to be nearly in an agitated state, or you'll be in a stress state, because you're breathing so heavy for so long. And then what they do is you try sit still and try let it relax and calm off, and see how your body is reacting to that. So they might do it for 5 breaths first, or even less. They might do it for 2 breaths first. Then it might go 3, 4, 5, and they relax and see how their body reacts to it. And then they might go 6 breaths, and then they relax all the way up to maybe 10. And you'll see then, as you start to get above that you are actually in a very stressed state. Your body is physiologically stressed, and you are getting psychologically stressed, and that your anxiety is going through the roof. And then they sit and you try calm yourself, and you try calm your breathing, and you try bring it back down slow, nice and easy, nice and rhythmic again. And the idea is to reduce that, or increase, I should say, that tolerance, and increase that stress threshold. Now, this isn't something that you do in real time, like when you're really stressed or when you have anxiety. This is something that you would practice at home when you are in the morning or in the evening, not before you go to bed, though, because you don't want to be too stressed out going to bed. So it's just another thing to add on top, something that people are practicing at the moment, they're working on, see how it works for them. I'd be following it a small bit myself, so I want to see what the results are looking like, and I see if they do a bit of research on it, how the results will come back. So guys, that is everything for today. Now, we did touch on a lot of scientific stuff, but I kind of wanted to nail home that same point of Bohr's law. And Bohr's law is carbon dioxide needs to be, and Bohr's law is that oxygen will bind to hemoglobin, and hemoglobin will carry that oxygen around your body, and it'll go to your muscles and it'll go to your brain, but it won't be released unless you have a high amount of CO2 in your body, and that high amount of CO2 is going to cause your blood pH to drop. Okay, so it makes your body more acidic. Now, if your body becomes more acidic, the oxygen gets released. So that's the main thing. Now, if you take that away, think about it for a couple of days, maybe journal on it, or even just go do a small bit more research on it. That will explain a lot as how your breathing affects your body. Now, it does affect different, as I was talking about that pre-Botzinger complex and talking about that parafacial nucleus, how it does affect an actual neurological areas of your brain and body. But that CO2 to oxygen and getting more oxygen to your muscles on account of having more CO2 in your blood is the most important takeaway from today. How do we get more CO2 in our blood? We slow our breath down, and you can use holds at either end. So I have, this could be another 2-hour podcast, and I could go into like box breathing where you're doing 5, 5, 5 and 5, 5 seconds inhale, 5 seconds hold, 5 seconds exhale, 5 seconds hold, and I could be going into that type of stuff. Or we could talk through a couple of Wim Hof methods, which I'm not an expert on, but we could talk through them a small bit, and we could go through a few other breathing methods as well, what people use. But I want to just nail home that idea of increasing your CO2. To increase your CO2, you need to slow your breath down. You need to breathe through your nose, which is another very important takeaway from this. Breathe through your nose because there's nitric oxide in your nose, because of a load of reasons, but because of the fact that nitric oxide is produced in your nose, it dilates your lungs and it dilates your blood vessels, and it can reduce your blood pressure and it can reduce your stress levels. On top of that, it has antiviral properties. Breathing through your nose increases the resistance, so that when you are breathing on normal like today, it's slowing your breath down, so it's actually forcing you to increase your own CO2. Then after that, then we went on and we talked a small bit about how breathing light to breathe right, how taking breaths so nobody can hear them is the best way and most optimal way of breathing on a day-to-day. And we also talked about nasal breathing and athletic performance. And through that then we talked about breathing patterns, slow breathing, high amplitude breathing, rhythmic breathing, and the last one was non-rhythmic breathing. And then we touched on a small bit of humming as well. Humming increases nitric oxide, don't forget that. And nitric oxide, guys, is not the same as nitrous oxide that they put in cars. They're not the fucking same thing. And it's not laughing gas either, which is something that actually I myself got caught for a while in that, thinking that, I wonder, are they taking with laughing gas, think that they put in a balloon and they inhale, is that nitric oxide? But it's not, it's different. Nitric oxide, you get it from beetroot, which I won't be getting it from anytime soon, but that's what you get it from. If anyone wants to eat it, it tastes like dirt, I think, but that's my own personal. Anyway, I digress about what I was talking about. So we talked about stress management and actually increasing that CO2 tolerance. And I think that kind of covers the main stuff that I spoke about today. If anyone is interested in looking in or doing a small bit more research, the book The Oxygen Advantage is excellent, by Patrick McKeown. There's another book, Breath, by James Nestor. Brian McKenzie on Instagram is very good. And the Health and Human Performance Foundation, or Shift Adapt, is another one that he has. And they go through a lot of real research-based breathing techniques and research-based, or research on breathing. And then another interesting one, if you really look into the neurological side of things, is Andrew Huberman, or Huberman Lab, and Jack Feldman also. So they're two researchers from Stanford at the moment, and they're putting out a lot of good information on it. So guys, that is everything for today. Thanks a million for listening. I hope you took something away from this. If you could, I would love if you could repost this on your story, and if you could rate it or leave a comment on iTunes, that would help me out massively. Also, if you could subscribe so you're getting these out, they come out every Sunday. That's everything for now, guys. If you have any questions, get on to me on Instagram, or you can send me an email at mobilitytutor@gmail.com. On top of that, then my website is mobilitytutor.com. So that's everything, guys. Thanks a million for listening. I will chat to you all next week. Keep an eye out on Instagram to see what our podcast will be about next week. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.